This person said you were too much in your caring, too much in the way you spoke, too much in silence in the way you could foresee what could go off track. But this person didn't see that you were avoiding collapse every day without making a fuss. While complaining about your way, you supported everything that they couldn't even name. You made things work, even when what was right was already crumbling. This person called you intense, but it was you who kept the emotions breathing. This person got irritated with what you said, but it was you who noticed where the relationship was sinking. And now that you're no longer here, this person lives in what you always tried to avoid: chaos. But they won't admit it, they won't say it, they just feel it. Because now it's too late. Now they realize that what they called exaggeration was care, that complication was prevention, that your straightforwardness was the only thing that truly protected. Have you ever been called a burden by someone who relied entirely on you? Have you ever been criticized for trying to save what the other let crumble? This person thought you were suffocating when in reality, you were supporting what they never had the maturity to handle. And still, you stayed for a long time, trying to adjust what had already hurt you, until you stopped. Not because you stopped loving, but because you realized. You realized you were losing yourself. You realized you were diminishing your worth to uphold the idea of something that no longer existed. And then, this person felt it, felt your absence, felt the echo of what you did without being seen, felt the void that was left when you decided not to return to the same old place anymore. But it was already too late. You no longer fit into spaces that treated you as excess. You are no longer meant to carry what the other doesn't want to hold. You noticed everything. And after that, there's no going back to pretending you didn't see. If this touched you, comment, "I needed to hear this." Or just feel, but feel it for real. Because there are truths that only hurt when they stop being denied. This person lost you when they thought you were the problem. This person used to say, they said it with irony, with impatience, with that look that made you doubt your own worth. They said it when you tried to talk. They said it when you showed something that could get worse. They said it when you just wanted to breathe together. But you noticed, before everything and everyone else, you noticed the unresolved silences. You noticed the small gestures that no one saw. You noticed the omissions, the contradictions, the disconnections, and you didn't ignore it, even knowing that you would be misunderstood. Even tired of always being the one who saw beyond the surface. Because what you did wasn't complicating things, it was protecting, it was supporting. Even when this person didn't see it, or pretended not to see it, or didn't want to see it, you were there. Planning, organizing, holding up what wasn't said, fixing on the inside what looked normal on the outside. But you knew it wasn't normal to have to silence what bothered you. You knew it wasn't fair to have to choose between love and losing yourself. You knew it wasn't love when only one person was trying to hold on. This person looked at you as if you were exaggerating, but you felt that if you stopped, everything would crumble. And one day, you stopped, because your body got tired, because your mind couldn't handle so much muffled noise anymore, because your heart screamed enough. And it was in that enough that everything came to light, because it wasn't you who complicated things. It was you who prevented the fall. It was you who held on in silence. It was you who, even when hurt, got up to keep anyone from falling. This person said you were making a storm, but now they live in the flood that you always tried to avoid. And even so, there are days when you miss it. Missing being seen, missing being recognized, missing someone who looked at you with the same clarity with which you always looked at them. But the absence you feel is not about being with this person. It's hard to find someone who doesn't confuse your clarity with exaggeration. You were treated as if you were the one creating problems, when in fact, you were just seeing what nobody else had the courage to face. You tried to show it. You tried to soften it. You even tried to downplay who you were, to fit into someone else's comfort. But the more you conceded, the further that person drifted from reality. And you found yourself increasingly alone even when together. That's when the deepest pain sets in, when you realize you were alone, even in company. Have you ever felt that way? Comment here, "I needed to hear this," because when you care too much, you become the target of those who don't want to look at themselves. That person said you suffocated them, but they never stopped to notice how much you silenced yourself to avoid hurting them. That person thought it was control, but it was restraint. It was you trying to prevent the chaos that was growing under the rug. That person didn't realize because they never had to do what you did. They never had to deal with what you held back. You were the pillar. But no one likes to remember the pillar until the roof starts to give way. And today that person feels the weight you carried. They feel it in the small faults of the day, in the mess that has spread, in the absence of direction. But they will never admit it, because acknowledging that would require humility. And those who call you a burden rarely have the courage to recognize that they leaned on you. You noticed everything. You noticed when your presence became a burden. You noticed when listening came to an end. You noticed when it no longer mattered how hard you tried. The answer was always impatience. Have you ever been that person? Have you ever carried more than you should without ever being recognized? Share your thoughts below, or keep them to yourself, but don't stay silent any longer, because now you know. When someone calls a person who holds emotions difficult, the real difficulty is looking at their own immaturity and doing something about it. That person lost you when they thought you were the problem. When you realized that your way of seeing too much was bothersome, when you mistook depth for drama, but you won't go back, not after realizing how much you devalued yourself to hold on to what only drained you. You saw what you needed to see, and after that, you can't unsee it. Perception breaks the invisible chains, and you broke them. You broke the need to be accepted by those who can't see. You broke the cycle of molding yourself to avoid bothering others. You broke the pattern of shrinking to fit in. Now, there's no turning back, because those who perceive transform, even in silence, even with pain, even with longing. And that person? They will keep saying that you complicated things, because it's easier than admitting they never had the strength to keep up with your clarity. But you don't need to explain anymore. You are not a burden. You are support. And those who lack the maturity to handle this will continue to call what is, in fact, depth, an excess. Do you feel this? If so, drop a black heart just to show that there are still people who see deeply. Or write this: I used to be the pillar and they called me a burden. And let those who find you here as perceive, because in the end, perception is this: to see what was denied, to feel what was suffocated, to name what was discredited. And now you name, you set boundaries, you create absence, you learned. That person may even try to come back. They may say they've changed. They might even give beautiful speeches, but you don't need to listen anymore, because now you recognize when someone just wants you whole so they won't have to rebuild themselves alone. And you won't anymore, because now you know those who didn't value your presence don't deserve your return. That person might even swear they understand now. They might say they see the mistake. They might even text you in the middle of the night with that message full of commas and regret, but you don't feel anymore. Not because you've grown cold, but because now you realize where you were losing yourself. You gave too much, you tried too hard, you believed that if you explained it again, this time the person would understand. But it was never enough, because this person didn't want to comprehend, they wanted to stay comfortable, and your discomfort threatened that. Your clarity demanded presence, and those who live by escaping don't know how to deal with those who demand reality. This person used your words as a pretext to argue, but they never truly responded to what you were saying. They never embraced what you revealed with courage. They only reacted, deflected, avoided. And deep down you knew it wasn't you who complicated things. It was the other person who oversimplified what needed depth. You wanted to resolve things. They wanted to forget. You wanted to grow. They wanted to keep everything in the same place, even if it was broken. And that wore you out. Every conversation that ended in nothing, every gesture of yours ignored, every attempt to build something real, brushed under the rug, until one day you stopped. You didn't announce it. You didn't shout. You just withdrew. And that withdrawal was the only thing this person didn't know how to handle, because they were used to your movement, to your commitment, to your insistence. When you stopped, they saw that you were the engine. They saw that you were the one keeping the bond alive, but not out of mutual love, out of one-sided perseverance. Have you felt that? Have you recognized that you were the only one trying? Comment here: I'm tired of trying alone, because there comes a point. And it doesn't give a warning. It simply ends, not to hurt, but to protect what's left of you. Today this person feels, even if they don't say it, even if they post forced smiles, edited stories, cliché phrases. Inside, they feel, because the absence of the one who supported them cannot be filled with any distraction. What you did wasn't common. It wasn't replaceable. It wasn't something that can be found again without deserving it. You were whole, and because of that you were drained. But now it's different, because you've realized, and those who realize no longer sell themselves for crumbs. You don't come back, not because you've become proud, but because you understood the consequence of giving yourself to those who only know how to take. This person said you were exaggerating, but never acknowledged how much they needed you, never admitted how much they relied on your balance, never thanked you for the disasters you prevented that they themselves caused. And now they see, but they see too late. Only now you are no longer available to be an anchor in someone else's sea. Now you are rooted in your own ground. Now you no longer need to adapt to avoid bothering others. Now you don't feel guilty for being who you are, because you finally realized the problem was never being too much. It was being in a place where there was too little, less maturity, less listening, less giving. You deserve to be read between the lines. You deserve to be felt in subtle gestures. You deserve to be embraced without needing to explain yourself all the time. This person didn't have the capacity for that, and you only discovered that after you broke trying to teach. But you don't need to teach anymore. You've already taught everything you did, everything you were, and those who didn't learn no longer have access. Have you realized this? If so, comment here. Now I choose where I stay, and hold on to this truth as if you were guarding the key to a sacred door. Not everyone deserves to cross what you are inside. This person had access and chose to diminish you. Now they live with the absence of what they once had and didn't know how to appreciate. This person had access and chose to diminish you. They called you excessive, when what you did was maintain balance. They accused you of demanding, when what you asked for was reciprocity. They looked at you with disdain, when what you offered was vision. But you didn't lower your gaze. Even when hurt, even in silence, even when afraid, you never stopped seeing the truth. And perhaps that was what bothered this person the most. The fact that you see too clearly, feel too deeply, anticipate what no one has had the courage to admit yet. This perception you carried they didn't understand. And because they don't understand, they attack. That's what many do to those who feel too deeply. They try to discredit, they try to silence, they try to extinguish the light that reveals everything they still don't want to see. But you learned that your intensity wasn't a flaw, it was a gift. It was an emotional filter too finely tuned to endure shallow relationships. This person confused your strength with a threat, because while you were looking within, they were still using distractions to avoid confronting their own emptiness. And then, when you started to withdraw, it wasn't love that they missed, it was the reflection, because you were the clearest mirror they ever had. And without that mirror, they had to look at themselves, and that's when everything began to hurt. But it was already too late to reverse, too late to fix, too late to try to rewrite the story they themselves tore apart, because now you no longer respond the same way. Now when the message comes, you read it but don't feel excited. Now when you hear the name, you remember but don't bleed. Now when you feel, you understand but don't cling. You realized, and that's what changes everything. This realization sets you free, because it doesn't come with anger, it comes with a decision. You decide what no longer serves you. You decide what will never repeat. You decide who no longer affects you, neither with sweet words nor rehearsed tears. Have you ever experienced this? Have you noticed that silence is your loudest response? Comment below. My silence now is a decision. This person, if they still try to get closer, it's not out of love, it's out of neediness. It's out of the absence of control you no longer give them. And you feel it, because now your senses are sharper, more alive, more true to themselves. You know when someone returns out of necessity and not out of genuine transformation. And you will not accept less than the truth. This person deep down still hopes you'll go back to being the way you were before. But what they haven't realized is that what existed before died with the neglect. You have died to this story. It died to the role of someone who carries everything. It died to the cycle of proving one's worth, and it was reborn, without an audience, without excuses, without needing to explain anything to anyone. Now you live what is yours, what doesn't require translation, what doesn't doubt your feelings. This person still tries to tell their version of the story. Maybe they say you disappeared, that you gave up, that you changed. And it's true, you changed, but it wasn't an escape. It was a choice, because now you no longer accept being where there's no listening, where your depth is seen as excessive, where your giving is met with disdain, you won't go back. Not because you've turned to stone, but because you've become a root, and those who are roots don't get planted in shallow ground anymore. You understood. This person won't admit it, but you no longer need that, because now the validation comes from within. It comes from the peace that only those who rescue themselves know. If you felt this, comment, "I won't go back to what extinguished me," or just feel, but feel with courage, with presence. This story cannot be rewritten, because now you are writing your own. If it resonated with you, share, comment on the topic, leave a like, and subscribe for more truths.